What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Motorfest. So I have finally gotten a Nitro Chemist set for every single class in the game. I am also currently working on getting a scorebreaker for a few more, but I actually have a scorebreaker and also a loot digger for a majority of the classes in the game as well. So I would say I have basically gotten every class finished up for the most part. And of course later on I will go after like some of the like live reward sniffer sets or like even a Fame Magnet and a Buck set, which I do have for a lot of the classes as well, but I figured I may end up grinding out more of these to actually have more of those done. That way I can test them out in future videos, but going after maxed out part sets was definitely a pretty interesting journey. I would say if you guys are going after maxed out chemist sets for every single class though, I would definitely recommend being ready for that grind. Like, it definitely takes a while. Even running a full loot digger set on a said class, guys, it's still going to take hours on end. But the biggest question though is how long did it actually take me to get a maxed out set in every single class? So starting off with the Street Tier 1 class here, getting all the sets for this one honestly wasn't all that terrible, and luckily I would say many people are most likely going to enjoy one of these Street Tier classes. At least using a Tier 1 and Tier 2 I would say are probably going to be some of the most used classes anyway, so getting a maxed out set for these probably isn't going to be terrible. Now, I would say, guys, if you are looking to get maxed out sets, as I did mention before, definitely be ready for a pretty long grind because it is going to take a while. For me to finally get a full maxed out chemist set on the Street Tier 1 class took me around a total of 6.5 hours. I know that probably sounds absolutely insane, guys, but even running a loot digger set, it still took me a crazy amount of time to do so, and that is probably going to come down to the RNG in this game being kind of odd, but I would say even running a loot digger did indeed help. And funnily enough, I actually got like 5 or so parts within like 2 to 3 hours. And then of course getting that last 1 to 2 parts took like 3 hours in itself. So I guess in some way it is probably going to come down to like the overall RNG you actually do have when getting a set completed. Even running something like a loot digger and having the best affixed stats active, I would still say, guys, getting a full chemist set is going to take hours on end, and if you actually want to get a score breaker, you might end up getting that first. And then of course we have the tier 2 next, which I would say a lot of players are most likely going to max this class out before the others. Now if you guys are wondering, by the way, to get my first chemist set in this one, took me a crazy 7 hours to get the first one. Now I have to admit something though, even though it did take me 7 hours to get the said set done, I actually managed to get multiple other sets in the exact same time of getting that one. So I obviously did end up getting a loot digger set here, which I would say is going to be a very important build. That way you actually can get more parts over time, and you can also, like, delete those to get more spare parts as well. And I would say it's probably going to be a win-win, but sometimes you most likely might get a bit lucky and get the Nitro Chemist before that one, which of course is going to be primarily based on RNG. Now I also have a Treasure Sniffer as well. Funnily enough, I don't even have this entire build even like maxed out yet, or even went after it to get the entire like correct build for it, like running Collector or even like the other perk that obviously helps you find them easier. I will most likely do this in the near future though to test it out. I also have a Scorebreaker set, guys, as well, which I definitely recommend getting at least one of these. And I would say if you're going to be grinding for 7 hours for a Nitro Chemist set, you are most likely going to get at least one of those. At least I have noticed that anyway when going after them. I also managed to get a second Nitro Chemist set for this class as well. Again, guys, within these 7 hours I did manage to do this. Now, I don't know why I actually have Bended and Pure on this entire build, but I will definitely have to test out the Bended perk, because at this point, I'm kind of mixed on that. And then of course the last build I am currently working on is going to be a buck set for the Street Tier 2. But as you guys can see, even running a loot digger set with running this class for hours, I am still missing a motor core part. But I do want to mention, if you guys actually have one of the buck parts in the regular Street Tier 1, you can actually use the Tier 1 part with the Tier 2 class, even though it is obviously going to make you slower. At least you can max out the entire set doing so. I have to admit something, by the way, guys. Why did they put the classes together? Like, why do I actually have the Tier 1 parts with the Tier 2? I do understand you can use, like, the Tier 1 parts with Tier 2, but I really do think they should actually separate these. I mean, going over 10 parts to actually get to my few Tier 2 parts here is probably going to be slightly annoying. Like, maybe they can actually... No. Maybe they can have... No. Maybe they can actually separate the Tier 1 and the Tier 2. That way you can actually navigate the classes a bit easier. And then of course we're going to have the drift class next, which I would say a lot of players aren't the biggest fan of. I really do understand where you guys are coming from because this class might not be the funnest one to do, and you most likely might not even want to run them. Now for me though, it took me around 6 hours to get my chemist set completed. In that time I also got a score breaker set here, which funnily enough I have not put any of the set of fixed stats on yet, mainly because I'm not 100% sure what I actually want to do with it. Now I have to admit guys, going after a maxed out set with one of these drift cars is probably not going to be the funnest experience, but having a maxed out set for this class is probably going to be very important. That way you actually don't have to worry about the summits. Now I do know guys, there is most likely going to be another set similar to like a chemist one here that is most likely going to have a big bonus to the hothead and slippery, which we also saw a lot of these coming back in the Crew 2 before. Now funnily enough, I wasn't actually going to max out the drift class. I was basically going to leave it how I had it before, where I pretty much had a bunch of random gold parts on it, and I ran hothead and slippery on each one. And the reason for that though is you really do not need anything else on these cars, at least right now. There is definitely going to be upgraded part sets in the future, most likely having better fixed stats on them, and also like a higher multiplier on some of these said stats, but for the drift cars right now, guys, I would say the biggest thing you actually are looking for is hothead and slippery, and if you actually want to get a chemist or a score breaker set, it is most likely going to come down to preference. And then moving over to the next class is of course going to be the racing, which I would say is probably one of my favorite classes in the entire game right now, but it was also funnily enough one of my most successful classes I have done so far. I actually managed to get around 5 sets done in around 7 hours, of course going after the lovely chemist set, which is one of 2. My first one is going to be a Fame Magnet set here, guys, which I have to admit, the Fame Magnet set is actually going to be insanely good, and I am definitely going to be planning on doing another video on this one, most likely testing out different ones in different classes for that matter, but the first chemist set I actually got is going to be right here. It's actually going to have a very good build on it, guys, Iron Grip and Pure, so you do know this set is going to be primarily based for like the racetrack type of events that do most likely show up in a summit in the future. I will also be testing out this entire set and other ones. But funnily enough, this was actually the first Nitro Chemist set I actually got for the racing category, and I was honestly pretty dang happy with having that for my first build. And of course, the other set I do actually have is going to be a Bucks, which I haven't ran this one that much, guys, but from the few events I have done with it, my goodness, these Bucks and Magnet sets really are going to be insanely good. Do stay tuned for more videos on those coming soon. I also, of course, have a lovely loot digger, but here's the insane part. I actually did not have a loot digger for the first chemist set I actually got, so I would say you definitely do not have to have one, but let's be honest though, having a loot digger set for the longer events in a racing car is probably going to be a way better experience for that matter. I also have a pure and extra pump set as well for like the regular street events that you may end up having to do some of the like regular races around the map in a summit, so at least you are going to be prepared to have a second set for those. And funnily enough, guys, for some odd reason I cannot get the last score breaker part for the brakes. Besides that though, I would actually really like to get that. That way I can complete all of the sets I do have here, but overall though, guys, I would say around 7 hours to max out the racing class, plus also getting around 4 to 5 sets at the same time is probably going to be a big win. And then moving over to the next class is of course going to be the Dragster, so I would say this class is going to be liked by many, but it most likely is also not going to be liked by that many players though, and the fact of that is most likely the amount of events you actually can't do, at least compared to the Crew 2 that obviously had a lot of different races you could grind out. Here on Motorfest, guys, there's barely going to be actually like 4, so you are most likely going to grind out like the exact same 2 events the entire time when going after it. For example, I do not even have a loot digger set for it, and I am also not even close to even getting one. And the reason for that is if you are grinding out this class, you are obviously going to be doing the actual drag events, which of course in return only give you maybe 3 to 5 parts, sometimes even less than that, so you might actually get maybe 1 gold or 2, and you are most likely not going to get any more besides that. It's kind of insane because the drag class took me around 5.5 to 6 hours. To get a chemist set without a loot digger, I only have 1 part here, which I would say is going to be absolutely insane. Now, I do want to mention, by the way, guys, I also have another build right here that is going to have more loot diggers on it, But if you are wondering, by the way, let's say you actually have 5 out of 7 Loot Digger parts active, it is still not going to make any difference whatsoever compared to like a regular random set, while having Goldfinger and Lucky on there, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. But when grinding out the class, I did manage to finally get one full chemist set for these, which I have to admit, guys, having a full chemist set on a drag car is definitely going to be worth it in every single way. Like, I did notice, guys, having a chemist set active not only makes the speed traps so much easier, and you also get a higher score in them, especially running them solo with a drag car. You can also jump into the drag events and also be much faster, which I would say in return is going to help in summits. And then we also have the Hypercars next, which I would say is going to be one of the most popular classes in the game. I would say a lot of players most likely already have sets done, but for this one though, guys, it took me around 7.5 hours to get my first chemist set done. And of course, in the meantime, I also got other ones as well, like the lovely XP magnet here, which funnily enough, I still do not have the correct build on. I may have to go back and do that with that one. And then, of course, looking at the next set I do have is going to be on the lovely Emerald Storm Edition. It is going to be a full Loot Digger set here, but by the way, guys, I actually did get a full other set done without even having one of the last Loot Digger parts active. Funnily enough, I would say you can probably get many of the part sets done without a Loot Digger, but it is most likely going to help, of course, if it was actually working correctly, which I would say is going to be a pretty interesting topic. Now, the other set I do have is going to be a Scorebreaker set as well, which I would say, though, having a Scorebreaker set for a Hypercar is probably going to be extremely useful, and you are most likely going to use it insanely often in summits. I am also going to have my lovely Chemist set here, which is indeed Extra Pump and Pure. To this day, I would still say this is probably going to be one of the best part builds you can run. I will also be doing more videos on this in the near future because, well, there's obviously a lot of different builds you can do, but that will end up doing it for my main part sets I actually have done for the Hypercars. Now, I am going after a few more. I am, of course, not actually done with them yet, so I do want to get a Buck set. I, for some odd reason, cannot get myself the lovely suspension part here. And I am also going to be insanely close with getting a second chemist set as well. But for some odd reason, I cannot seem to get a tire part. I would say many people are most likely going to know exactly how this feels with going after a max parts set. And now moving over to the lovely Alpha GP class is probably going to be another class many players are going to max out fairly early on. For me, guys, to get a full chemist set, which I only do have one at the moment, took me around 7 hours to actually get it. So the one set I do have right here is going to be a Scorebreaker, which I would say on the Alpha GP class is probably one of the best ones you can actually get, and that's most likely going to come down to the handling and the speed of these. Do keep in mind though, they are not going to be as quick as they were in the Crew 2. In that game, they did around 295 miles an hour, and in this game, they barely hit 255, so they are obviously going to be a bit slower. And then, of course, going over to my first chemist set I actually have right now, I am going to have to grind this out to get a second one, because I am insanely close missing one part. I am currently running Extra Pump and Pure, which is insanely good for the main events. Now, if you are going to do a racetrack, you are most likely going to want Iron Grip. That is probably the second set I am indeed going after. I also have a lovely Loot Digger set here, which I would say I ran this about 80% of the time I was grinding. I really do think these sets really are going to be useful. Even though having a Loot Digger, you most likely get more green and blue parts from it. At least you actually have that thing active anyway, but I also have the Treasure Sniffer as well, but I currently do not have the actual build set up on this yet. I am most likely going to do that here soon and test it out a bit more. And then the last set I am currently going after is going to be a second Nitro Chemist set where I will most likely be running Iron Grip and Pure. Of course, I do have to get the lovely motor core part to do so, which I would say with how the RNG is most likely going to take a while. Overall though, guys, I have to admit the Alpha GP car was definitely not the worst one to max out. And then moving over to the motocross bikes, I would say this one was also not going to be the best experience for everybody. For me, guys, it took me around 7+ hours to get all the sets I actually have for it, including the lovely Nitro Chemist set I do actually have here, which I am currently running Pure Ventilated and Extra Pump. I will definitely be testing out that set a bit more in the future to really see if I could tweak a few things with it, but let's be honest, a lot of people most likely don't even want to use these bikes anyway. I also somehow got a Loot Digger set within 2 hours of actually grinding it out, but to go after a full chemist set took me an extra 5, which I would say is a bit insane to actually do so. I also luckily got a few other sets while doing that. I do have an XP magnet, which I would say with a motocross bike probably isn't the best thing you can run, but hey, at least it is going to be an extra set you obviously got along the way. And then for the last part set for the motocross bikes is going to be a score breaker, which I would say, guys, even on a motocross bike is going to be insanely viable, getting you well over 150,000 points in most summits. And then, of course, guys, moving over to the Rally Raid class now, I would say this one probably isn't going to be as terrible as the others, and at least you are going to have a lot of different events you can grind out, but this class, guys, took me around 7.5 to 8 hours to actually get all of the sets I have, including the lovely Nitro Chemist set I am currently running. So the first one here is going to be a Treasure Sniffer. I also do not know why I actually maxed out this with Collector and Treasure Hunt. That is most likely because I was probably going to do a video on it, because I do want to see how that set does actually perform. And then of course moving over to the Ford Bronco, I also have the lovely Loot Digger, having Goldfinger and Lucky as perks on there, which even to this day we still don't know if they actually work correctly. Hopefully one day we might actually know, but the next set I currently have is going to be on the Ford F-150 Raptor, which is indeed my lovely chemist set here. I am currently running Extra Pump Pure and Ventilated. Do keep in mind I will also be going over an actual part build set for these, that I would say is probably going to be the best fitted one possible, and of course testing out other ones to see if you can run them. But I would say, guys, a Nitro Chemist set on every class I have used so far definitely makes a huge difference for that matter. Now for the next one is going to be a 959 raid, at least the set I do have. It is going to be the XP Magnet. I also do not have the actual build on this yet, so do stay tuned for that. So I would say the XP Magnet on many of your favorite classes is probably going to be a pretty positive investment. I also did want to show another set I do have for the Rally Raid, which is indeed going to be another score breaker. Funnily enough, I actually almost forgot about this set because I did not have the parts on a vehicle, but I did want to show this though, guys, because a score breaker on a Rally Raid is definitely going to be an insanely good investment. And then finally, the last set I am currently working on is going to be a Bucks, which I'm honestly not too pressed to get this one because I have so many of them. Now, moving over to the Demolition Derby, guys, I have to admit this was by far the worst class I had in the entire game to get an actual chemist set for. This is going to be crazy, guys. It took me an insane 12 hours to get this set done. Funnily enough, I was actually missing around one set for basically over 3 hours of grinding, and no matter what I actually did, I could not get that said part done. It honestly was pretty frustrating doing this. I never honestly want to drive these vehicles again. Most likely will have to though in like a summit, but I am insanely glad I actually got these chemist set done, even though 12 hours for an entire set in this game is absolutely bonkers. Now, of course, racing that long, I did indeed get a few other sets done, so I also got a buck set here, which I would say I'm most likely not going to run that often being in a Demolition Derby car. Who knows though, I may have to test that one out in the future. And then of course the other set I do indeed have is a Loot Digger. What's honestly insane about this though is I actually managed to get this around 3 hours in, and it took me an additional like 9 hours to get a chemist set done, running a Loot Digger part set, guys, with Goldfinger and Lucky. It is definitely going to be one of the craziest grinding sessions ever. Now, do not get me wrong, though. I did not do that in one session, though. I basically did it across like 3 to 4 days, where I was also working on other videos and, of course, working on other classes. And I also managed to get a score breaker set here, which is actually pretty useful, even though the Demolition Derby cars aren't all that fun to actually use. And then moving over to the rally class here, guys, surprisingly it wasn't nearly as bad as the Demolition Derby. I actually managed to get the said set done in this one in around 8.5 hours, which I would still say is probably going to be slightly insane, but getting that Nitro Chemist set was definitely worth every bit of it. I also managed to get another score breaker set here, so I would most likely say I do not have to get any more of these, but I will most likely end up grinding out many of the other classes where I am missing them. That way I can most likely test them out in future summits. Now for my first Nitro Chemist set, I am currently running Extra Pump Pure and Trawler. I'm not going to lie though, guys, I'm not 100% sure on what I actually want to run yet. I will definitely be testing more of these builds out here in the near future, but moving over to the next build I am currently running is going to be a lovely Loot Digger, which I would say most of my classes I actually have one of these on them. I would honestly hope so after running around 8 to 10 hours on a single class. to hope to get a Nitro Chemist set, I would like to think you would actually have a Loot Digger. And then for the other set, guys, which again I do want to mention, by the way, all of these sets were completed within that 8.5 hour time zone, which I would say is honestly pretty crazy, but I did indeed get a Buck set as well, but I do not have this one set up yet. I am also currently working on getting pretty close to a second Nitro Chemist set as well. Of course, the RNG is obviously not doing all that great. And then finally, the last set I'm insanely close to is an XP Magnet. And now moving over to the monster class here, guys, crazily enough, this was actually the fastest Nitro Chemist set I got. Out of grinding all the other classes in the entire game, this one only took me 5 hours. Also getting other sets done at the exact same time of doing so. I would like to know in the comments below, did you guys also have a class like this as well, where you basically got that one set done insanely quick, and then of course other ones obviously took a long time, but I also did manage to get a Loot Digger within around 2 hours or so when going after the other part sets. I was honestly insanely surprised how quick I actually got the sets for this class. Like, compared to the others, this was easily the fastest one I did. I also got a Score Breaker set as well, which is obviously pretty useful. Even though a monster truck is probably not going to be the #1 choice for those. What's also going to be absolutely insane, guys, I managed to get not one but two Nitro Chemist sets in 5 hours. I know that's probably going to sound insane, but this one I am currently not sure on the build I actually want to go after. I am most likely going to be testing that one out more in the future, but the main build I currently am running is going to be an Extra Pump and Pure, which I would say is by far one of the best builds. And then moving over to the power boats, I actually managed to get a lot of sets done for this class, guys. I believe I actually got 6 different sets in around 9 hours of actually grinding out the power boats. So this class obviously did take a while. And I would say the biggest thing here is probably going to come down to the fact of actually doing the events, which there is not going to be that many of for that matter. I also have an Extra Pump and Pure build here for a Nitro Chemist set. I may end up testing out different affixes stats on that one in the future, but the other set I obviously do have is going to be a Loot Digger, which surprisingly enough was the first set I actually got done for this, and then I actually managed to get other sets like the Score Breaker afterwards, which I have to admit, guys, having this on a boat right now is probably incredibly helpful. Now, don't get me wrong, though, there's not going to be a lot of skills around the map yet, but I really do feel like we might actually be seeing a lot more in the future, and if one of those actually show up in a summit, at least you're prepared. I also managed to get 3 other sets in the game, almost putting a set on every single powerboat in Motorfest, which is honestly pretty dang insane, but I actually have an XP magnet here. I do want to mention, by the way, none of these sets actually are set up. I am most likely going to do that here shortly, but I also have a treasure sniffer and a buck set. Now moving over to the final class here is indeed going to be the planes, which I have to say wasn't nearly as bad as some of the others. Surprisingly, guys, I got all of my sets including a Nitro Chemist in around 7.5 hours. I would probably say it is by far not going to be the funnest grind, but having a Chemist set in each class is definitely going to be well worth it. I am currently running Gateway and Pure, which I would say is pretty dang good. I will also be testing more of these set builds out later on, but the other set I also have, which I did indeed get within that 7 hours, is going to be a Loot Digger. Surprisingly, guys, I actually got this within the first 3 hours of grinding out the planes, which definitely did help out with doing some of these shorter events for more parts, but I would definitely recommend going after a Loot Digger. Of course, the RNG might not be on your side, though, and you may end up getting like a Score Breaker first, or even like your Nitro Chemist, which I wouldn't say is a bad thing. That way you actually get the said part sets you are actually looking for. Now, the last set I currently am going after, guys, is going to be a Treasure Sniffer, which funnily enough I would say is going to be insanely useful with the planes. Now, overall, guys, I would say going after maxed out part sets in each class probably wasn't as terrible as I thought. I would definitely say the Demolition Derby class being at 12 hours for a chemist is absolutely insane, but luckily many of the other classes weren't nearly as terrible as that one. And I do want to admit something, I also have around 360 hours at the moment in this game, so I have been basically grinding out every single class until you basically can't. I would like to know your experience so far with going after maxed out part sets here in Motorfest. Which classes have you guys had the best luck with, and which ones are you still working on? I do have a feeling it's most likely going to vary with the RNG in this game.